before Ibrahim Traoré ever drew his first breath, the soil of Burkina Faso had already tasted centuries of struggle and hope. This West African land, once called Upper Volta under French colonial rule, carried scars of conquest and sacrifice. Yet it also held the memory of kingdoms, traders, and poets who spoke of freedom long before foreign flags flew overhead. The revolution of Thomas Sankara in the 1980s had lit a flame, a brief, brilliant moment when dignity and self-reliance seemed possible. Sankara renamed the country Burkina Faso, the land of upright people, and dared to dream of an Africa unchained. But his assassination in 1987 left the nation mourning, his vision interrupted but never erased. Into this land of broken promises and undying hope, in 1988, a child named Ibrahim Traoré was born, his life destined to walk the fault lines of past and future, legacy and rebellion. Ibrahim Traoré was born in 1988 in the dusty town of Bondakai, in western Burkina Faso, a child of modest means. He grew up under the harsh Sahel sun, where survival was shaped by family, faith, and the silent weight of history. His father, a civil servant, and his mother, a woman of quiet strength, taught him discipline and humility. Around village fires, old men spoke of Thomas Sankara, the African Che Guevara, whose name burned like legend in young Ibrahim's imagination. By day, he helped tend livestock and fetched water. By night, he pored over books, by lantern-light books, about Africa's freedom fighters, revolutions, and the meaning of dignity. Even then, friends recalled a boy unusually serious, driven by questions bigger than himself. Why was his homeland so poor, yet so rich in spirit? Why did foreign powers still loom over African nations decades after independence? These childhood days shaped more than just his worldview. They planted the seeds of a life that would one day challenge the legacy of colonialism itself. Before the world knew his name, he was simply a boy from Bondakai, shaped by dust, duty, and a dream of something greater. At the University of Ouagadougou, Ibrahim Traoré's world grew wider, and so did his anger at its injustices. Among cracked lecture halls and faded blackboards, he saw a nation where youth brilliance was crushed by corruption and foreign debt. By day, he studied geology and earth sciences, fascinated by the riches buried under Burkina soil. By night, he debated in crowded dorm rooms, his voice calm but forceful. Why must Africans beg for what is already ours? Friends, remember his stubborn honesty. He refused bribes to join party youth wings, rejected easy paths to power. Instead, Ibrahim joined campus protests, stood against tuition hikes, and called out police violence. When tear gas filled the air, he didn't run. He stayed, eyes red, but spirit unbroken. It was here, in the clash of ideas and oppression, that the seed of revolution within him first truly took root. Graduating as a trained geologist, Ibrahim Traoré made an unexpected choice. He joined the army. Many saw it as a path to steady pay. For him, it was a way to serve a country he felt slipping away. In muddy training camps and sun-scorched firing ranges, he earned respect not with loud orders, but quiet resolve. Fellow soldiers remember a young officer who shared meals equally, slept on bare earth when his men did, and never used rank to command blind obedience. Yet the higher he rose, the more he saw what lay behind the camouflage. Political generals, trading loyalty for luxury, contracts siphoned into foreign accounts, and ordinary troops sent to die without boots or ammunition. Each briefing brought frustration, strategies written to please donors, not to defend villages. Ibrahim spoke little, but inside him, the quiet soldier's heart was turning into that of a rebel. Once again, a rebel in uniform. In October 2014, the streets of Ouagadougou erupted. Decades of simmering anger burst into flame when President Blaise Compaoré tried to extend his 27-year rule. Students, market women, and young soldiers alike flooded the boulevards, waving placards and chanting for change. Among them, Ibrahim Traoré moved silently, uniform hidden under civilian clothes, heart pounding. As parliament burned, Compaoré fled into exile. For Traoré, it was more than the end of a regime. It was proof that people's courage could topple even the mightiest. Yet euphoria quickly soured. New rulers promised reform, but delivered only reshuffled power. The corruption remained, foreign influence deepened, and the terror threat worsened. Watching this betrayal of hope, Ibrahim's belief hardened. True change would never come from politicians alone. It had to be forced by those willing to risk everything. After the revolution, Ibrahim Traoré rose quickly through the ranks, driven by a mix of idealism and fierce discipline. In dusty garrisons and half-built bases, he earned a reputation as the officer who refused luxury, ate with foot soldiers, and never raised his voice, but whose orders were obeyed without question. Burkina Faso's security crisis deepened as jihadist groups swept in from Mali and Niger. Ibrahim volunteered for some of the toughest deployments. Nights under open sky, scarce ammunition, and enemy forces hidden among civilians. Brothers in arms remember his quiet courage, checking trenches at dawn, calming nervous recruits, and reminding them why they fought, not for medals, but for villages under threat. Step by step, battle by battle, Traoré's name spread beyond his unit, whispered with respect across the front line. By 2018, Burkina Faso was bleeding. Rural schools were burning, markets stood deserted, and roads turned deadly from hidden IEDs. Amid this chaos, Captain Ibrahim Traoré emerged as a frontline strategist. He led small, mobile units into hostile territory, often outnumbered and under-equipped. His men recall him crouched over sand maps by lantern light, plotting ambushes and rescue missions with calm precision. Yet victories were bittersweet. Each cleared village revealed mass graves. Each liberated town risked new attacks the next. Day Ibrahim's letters home spoke little of triumph, but much of grief and stubborn resolve. "If we leave," he wrote once, "who will remain to protect them?" In those years of shadow war, the legend of the soft-spoken captain who stood where others fled began to take shape, quietly, powerfully. By 2020, the quiet captain had become impossible to ignore. His battlefield successes earned him promotion after promotion, even as higher officers hesitated to confront the political powers in Ouagadougou. Ibrahim Traoré became known not just for courage, but for speaking truths few dared, openly criticizing outdated tactics, calling for local militias to be armed, and demanding corruption in military supply chains be rooted out. In dusty barracks, young officers began to gather around him, drawn by his clarity of purpose. Among villagers and volunteers, word spread of an officer who shared water from the same bottle, who walked the same trails, and who buried the dead with his own hands. Behind the rank insignia, a deeper transformation took place, from a local commander to a man many now whispered about as the one who might lead us all. The country's crisis reached breaking point in September 2022. Attacks worsened, refugees flooded the cities, and frustration burned hotter than ever among young soldiers at the front. Ibrahim Traoré, now a respected captain, found himself at the center of whispered meetings and late-night talks under flickering lamps. Many urged him to act. He hesitated, aware that a coup meant blood, chaos, and a gamble with history itself. But the government's paralysis could no longer be ignored. In the pre-dawn hours of September 30th, armored vehicles rolled into Ouagadougou. Shots echoed. Smoke rose near the presidential palace. By sunrise, the banner on state TV had changed. Captain Ibrahim Traoré was the new face of power. Crowds surged into the streets, some cheering freedom, others fearing what might come next. It was a day that would mark not only Traoré's life, but the destiny of Burkina Faso. In October 2022, Ibrahim Traoré faced the nation for the first time as its new leader. Clad in dusty military fatigues, instead of a presidential suit, he spoke not as a conqueror, but as a soldier, answering what he called a national emergency. His voice was measured, his gaze steady. We have taken responsibility because the homeland is in danger. Our goal is security, dignity, and sovereignty, not power for its own sake. Across Burkina Faso, people gathered around flickering TVs and radios, some hopeful, others deeply skeptical. In his short speech, Traoré pledged to drive out the jihadists, clean up corruption, and defend the poor from exploitation. He warned foreign governments to respect the will of Burkina people, saying firmly, "This is our struggle, our land." But even as applause broke out in some city squares, many quietly wondered, could this young captain, barely in his mid-30s, succeed where older generals had failed? In that moment, Burkina Faso stood balanced between renewed hope and familiar doubt, waiting to see if this promise would finally be different. At just century 6, Ibrahim Traoré became the youngest head of state in the world, a title that both inspired and unsettled. Wearing plain army fatigues without gold epaulets, he stood before cameras and declared, "I am not here for power, but for the people." In the bustling streets of Ouagadougou, murals of the legendary Thomas Sankara began to appear alongside fresh graffiti. "Traoré, our hope." Crowds cheered, yet behind the painted walls, the crisis was real. Nearly half of Burkina Faso lay outside government control. Millions had fled their homes, and the state coffers were nearly empty. Foreign diplomats arrived, especially from France, offering advice and quiet pressure. Traoré listened politely, nodding and thanking them, but deep in his mind, a different vision was taking shape, one that looked beyond old alliances, toward a future driven by African hands alone. In January 2023, Ibrahim Traoré made a move that shook the region. He ordered French troops to leave Burkina Faso. It was bold and risky. Critics warned that the country might suffer economically, while supporters cheered wildly, believing they were witnessing the first real stand against decades of neo-colonial influence. In fiery speeches, Traoré echoed the spirit of Sankara, "No one will free Africa except Africans themselves." Across the capital, crowds burned French flags and waved Russian and Burkinab flags instead. The old fear of speaking against France seemed to break in an instant, for the first time in decades. The air in Ouagadougou felt charged with both hope and tension, a revolutionary energy that promised change, yet carried the risk of isolation and unknown consequences. With French troops gone, Traoré turned east, searching for new partners to keep Burkina Faso from standing alone. Russia stepped in, offering military equipment and training. Some whispered about shadowy Wagner fighters arriving, though official details remained unclear and deliberately vague. At regional summits, Traoré met with Mali's Assimi Goïta and Guinea's Mamadi Doumbouya, fellow military leaders who, like him, had seized power in coups. Together, they spoke of a new Pan-African front, free from the grip of former colonial powers. Critics warned this could push the country deeper into instability or new forms of dependency. Yet too many, it felt like Sankara's long-lost dream returning, a continent ready to rise on its own terms, no longer asking for permission from Paris or Washington, far from the capital's speeches and summits. The real test lay in Burkina Faso's Berni Sahel. Traoré's government expanded the volunteers for the defense of the homeland VDP, everyday farmers, traders, and students who put on uniforms and picked up rifles. New military bases rose in dusty villages. Intelligence networks grew deeper. In some areas, the strategy paid off. Towns once controlled by jihadists were retaken, and attacks were foiled before they could begin. But victory came at a price. The enemy adapted. Attacks shifted elsewhere. Volunteers, often poorly armed and trained, paid in blood and in the shadows. Concerns grew about revenge killings and abuses by some militias, threatening to undermine the very cause they fought for. Behind the fiery speeches and headlines, Ibrahim Traoré lived differently from most world leaders. He refused luxury cars, continued to wear his simple army fatigues, and kept his residence modest, just military quarters without grand halls or red carpets. At cabinet meetings, he demanded urgency. Speak quickly, the country is burning. Ministers were startled by his bluntness. Some admired it, others resented it. Friends and aides whispered he barely slept, working deep into the night, driven by a mix of fear, hope, and stubborn resolve. Too many ordinary Burkina, he became Captain Courage, the young soldier who dared to challenge a system older than him. To critics, he risked becoming a populist, too attached to image and slogans. But day after day, his choice remained the same: stay close to the people, far from the golden palaces of power. As Traoré's popularity soared among the youth and rural poor, a quieter chorus of criticism began to rise. Independent journalists accused his government of tightening its grip on the media, arresting dissenters, and intimidating critics. Human rights groups raised alarms about abuses by the volunteers for the defense of the homeland, civilian militias fighting terrorists, but sometimes accused of targeting rivals or entire communities. When pressed, Traoré's answer was blunt: "This is a war for our survival." To him, the fight against jihadist insurgents justified hard choices and tough measures. Yet inside army barracks and political circles, whispers grew louder. Was power becoming too concentrated in the hands of one young captain? Would promises of a quick transition to democracy fade into indefinite rule? The same people who once cheered began to ask difficult questions, testing the strength and honesty of his revolutionary promise. Beyond the dusty streets of Ouagadougou, Ibrahim Traoré's face appeared on murals, posters, and t-shirts across Africa, from Mali to Niger, Congo, to even Haiti. To many, he wasn't just Burkina Faso's president. He had become a symbol of defiance against centuries of foreign domination at Pan-African summits. He spoke boldly about building a single African currency, uniting markets, and forming a joint continental defense force. His words echoed the revolutionary dreams of Sankara and Lumumba, stirring hope among a new generation. Online. Young Africans called him the new Sankara, sharing clips of his speeches, slogans, and images edited with flames of revolution behind him. But admiration brought scrutiny too. Skeptics wondered if the icon would live up to the promise, or repeat the tragic cycle of past African heroes who rose fast and fell faster. As the revolutionary glow settled, hard realities tested Traoré's ideals. Food prices rose sharply, drought threatened harvests, and international aid, once steady, began to shrink. In the bustling markets of Ouagadougou, ordinary citizens felt the weight of rising costs and daily uncertainty. Determined not to rely on foreign help, Traoré urged farmers to focus on local crops, pushed reforestation campaigns, and launched small-scale factories to produce basics domestically. Mines were brought under greater state control to keep profits within Burkina Faso. Progress was real but slow, and frustration quietly simmered among city youth who had dreamed of instant transformation. Traoré faced a president's hardest test, turning revolutionary slogans into daily bread for millions, and doing so without losing the faith of those who believed in him. Today, Ibrahim Traoré walks a razor's edge, celebrated as a revolutionary hero by millions, yet burdened by the weight of expectation and the grind of governing. Each dawn brings new questions. Will elections truly come? Will foreign allies turn away? Can security forces keep the jihadists at bay? In dusty villages and crowded city streets alike, hope battles fear. Some citizens praise Traoré's stubborn courage and plain-spoken promises. Others whispered doubts about the concentration of power in young hands. Yet, every speech ends the same way: a pledge, fierce and unshaken. We will not betray those who died for this land. In that vow echoes the struggle of an entire generation, to defend not just territory, but dignity, memory, and a vision of an Africa unbowed. Ibrahim Traoré's story is far from finished. To some, he stands as the living echo of Thomas Sankara, a symbol of fearless defiance against centuries of exploitation. To others, he risks following a tragic path, where idealism is crushed by power, and revolution hardens into repression. The choices ahead will shape not only Burkina Faso, but inspire, or caution, an entire continent. Will he guide his nation to peace and true independence? Or will history record another leader overtaken by the very forces he vowed to fight? For now, one truth remains clear. In an age of silence and compromise, Traoré dared to raise his voice. And whatever the ending, his call, "Africa will be free by our own hands," has already lit fires in countless hearts across Africa and beyond.